Krishna,
Hi, Krishna. Hi, everybody.
everybody for being here.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Pasadena Photography Arts Co-Director Douglas Hill. I'd like to welcome you all to our latest forum virtual presentation of Multivalent by PPA's 2025 Photo Award recipient, Teela Misa DeLeón. But first, we wanted to let you know that our next installment of Open Show has been announced and we've begun accepting applications. The deadline for submissions is November 1st, and the online event will be presented on November 20th. For more information on how to apply, visit our website at pasadenaphotographyarts.org. From the beginning, PPA has been dedicated to fostering the photography community on the east side of Los Angeles. Toward that end, we are proud to support these entities dedicated to photography and the arts. We suggest that you check them all out. In the wake of the devastating Eaton fire, AltadenaPhotographers.org was set up as a registry to provide photographers impacted by the fire with replacement equipment. If you are in a position to help out or would like to take advantage of their service, visit the AltadenaPhotographers.org website to find out how. Today's forum does not have an underwriter. However, if you would like to help us present a future forum or open show, please contact us at pasadenaphotographyarts.org. We appreciate all the support we can get. We have several events in the planning stages for 2026. We're very excited about them. So please check out the pasadenaphotographyarts.org website for updates. And I'd like to introduce our guest for this evening. Teela Misa DeLeón is an interdisciplinary artist and writer working primarily with experimental large format photography and alternative process printmaking to explore perception, relation, and in patient, process-driven approaches. Their work engages with in-between spaces, between document and dream, presence and absence, what is seen and what resists visibility, and conceptual inquiry. The artist traces intimate and historical intersections where collective memory meets the emotional and material bodies, identities, and our relationship to him. These offer slow and intentional encounters, sites for intuitive sensing and reflection on a poetics of visibility and the subtle rituals of seeing embedded in everyday life that shape meaning. DeLeón is based in Olympia, Washington, on the traditional unceded land of the coastal Salish peoples. Their work has been exhibited throughout and the United States, including venues such as Photographic Center Northwest, Verum Ultimum Art Gallery, and Plexol Gallery. DeLeón studied gender and sexuality, critical theory, psychology, and visual arts at UC Santa Cruz and Evergreen State College, and is currently pursuing an MFA in photography at the Savannah College of Art and Design. Recent bodies of work include Object Permanence, documenting queer and trans life through sentimental objects, Bind, Unbound, Bind, investigating relational perception through material rupture, and Legible Silences, exploring silence as presence rather than absence. It's my great pleasure to introduce Teela Misa DeLeón.
Hi. Wow, thank you for reading all of that. I didn't realize how long it is. You did a really great job, and it was really cool to hear you read it. Thanks everyone at PPA. Thank you everyone for making it here to share this lovely evening together. Uh, Thanks also to the juror, Eve Schiller, and for Pasadena Photography Arts for supporting photo arts and giving me this opportunity to share my work, and also publishing an interview on Lens Scratch. It was wonderful. Okay. How is everyone doing? Is everyone here? I see you. Okay. What I have for y'all today is I made a little video recording that I'd like to share with you. It has a collection of images from multiple bodies of work that are set up more in a just kind of visual landscape as I'm discussing themes that I'm interested in and kind of some aesthetic background and concepts that I would like to share with y'all. And afterwards, I love to hear what you think about these themes and your take on how you feel and interpret this body of work, which will be the stills that are at the end part of the video. The video is 30 minutes long, so if you want to grab some tea, a little snack, settle in and go on a little visual journey. Let's see, what else do I need to tell you about this video? Oh yeah, it is on top of showing you all sorts of images. A lot of them are from my early work or studio experiments or darkroom experiments, so it's kind of all over the place, and a little bit about what interests me about still life, and also has just kind of like textures and little close-ups of corners around my home. Okay, let's do share sound is on. Okay, how's that working?
Looks great.
You can see my screen. All right, is everyone ready? Ready, go. Enjoy. Oh, I muted it. Okay.
The work I make is not trying to explain or teach a truth or reveal a story that I want you to know. I'm exploring questions about perception. How do we perceive and understand? How do those perceptions shift, become unfixed, or contradict themselves? The word vision, in its earliest use, referred specifically to a mystical or prophetic experience, to something seen in a dream or revelation. Only later, with the introduction of scientific optical devices, did it come to also include the physical act of sight of external stimuli or objects. That drift in meaning between the internal and the external, or the spiritual and empirical, still feels alive to me today. It's in the 17th century that we get the word visionary and use vision to describe an idea or inspired insight. The gesture returns to the internal as an act upon the external. When people speak of their vision, they often close their eyes, looking inside, and spread their hands like a banner of their idea across the landscape. It's not the same to say, "This is my sight," or even "This is my idea, my vision." Language is saturated, and this word now functions in all these ways. I think there's something lovely about arriving on a way of expressing seeing as a creative act. I've always been drawn to thresholds of contrasts and their point of rupture. The point at which looking closely at a surface becomes too close to know what object you're looking at. And then the further threshold, where if you look even closer, it no longer matters. The image becomes about the sensation that that surface communicates. My most formative visual inspirations as a youth were cloud-filled night skies, where the outlines of cloud forms under moonlight would make more of a texture than any discernible formation, and the moments between twilight and full dark in the woods. There is a kind of maximalist to minimalist visual transition in that window, where shadows and darkness reduce what you know to be dense and abundant surroundings into subtle and barely perceptible suggestions in the darkness, where something is almost not there, more felt than seen. When I say that a lot of my work examines presence and absence, I am thinking about absence more in this sense, not as a true vacancy, but a kind of presence we can barely or cannot perceive. I fell in love with photography as a medium when I understood how it could be used to touch that kind of space and bring unseen things into view. Some of the earliest experiments of mine that I really enjoyed were working with pinhole cameras and long exposures. I would aim them at empty chairs and corners of rooms, doorways, trying to capture a tangible weight of time and motion or mystery in these waiting spaces that held things that resisted being captured. It feels important to consider what information exists in those spaces we consider empty. I believe that voids are never really just empty, just nothing. The reflex to conflate absence with emptiness and the ways that presence exists within absence are themes that I often explore in my work. Photography promises truth. This happened. And I do like working with film. It does hold onto that vitality or romantic tether in a way that digital work cannot. I work a lot in camera and in single exposures, often using glass and mirrors and reflective surfaces to draw in elements from outside of the frame, creating spatial relationships that can feel impossible, but are nonetheless true to what was in front of the lens. What draws me in is photography's ability to complicate that truth, to fold the interpretive into the document, and hold both the visible and the invisible. There is a collaborative reciprocity in that process. The camera doesn't just record. Its seeing is porous, open to touch and time. Hiroshi Sugimoto, one of my favorite photographers, shared in an interview that in some of his dioramas, he would dress up in all black to step into the scene and bodily dodge the exposure to correct the museum's lighting. Darkroom experiments and alternative process extend that kind of relationship, ways of guiding an image as it is emerging rather than after the fact. In all these ways, the camera became more than a documentary instrument to me, but more like a support for storytelling and perception, a medium for more than just physical sight. I could say there are two main things that brought me to my exploration of still life. First was an interest in photography's relationship to painting and how we approach each with a different mode of viewing. And second is how it intersected with my interest in what becomes embedded within objects and how we make meaning through them. Classical still life paintings were made in an era when realistic painting was the cultural standard of visual truth, long before cameras. The Dutch masters trompe-l'oeil, the painting technique so realistic it could fool the eye, wasn't just a parlor trick. It asserted realistic rendering as a kind of truth. Court portraits documented marriage negotiations. Botanical illustrations served as scientific record. Still lifes as inventories of wealth. Viewers were trained to read realistic painting as depicting reality. That perceptual education that taught people to see realism and recognize it in things like perspective, shading, proportion as real and true in a painting, those visual faculties transferred to photography. Photography did not invent the desire for images to be perfectly truthful records. It inherited and mechanized it. While the still life painting was still made by a human hand, and so its claim to truth still required a sort of suspension of disbelief, the added element of its subject matter being domestic, foods and flowers, encourages an association with neutrality. This, of course, was inaccurate, and it's popularly known that memento mori and vanitas paintings were symbolically coded moral allegories against leading a frivolous life of excess, and that photography is always mediated through a human hand and systems of power and cultural norms that decide how and who gets to be seen. Still, considering the still life painting as innocent or neutral persists. They are appreciated for their simple beauty. And considering the photograph as an image depicting truth, at least in a near or technical sense, persists as well. Both still life and photography have a relationship with claims of neutrality, of being just recordings. And these camouflage, naturalizing power structures, presenting ideology as technical observation, or constructed meaning and value systems as inherent truth. The way that still life paintings presented objects was not just morally coded with religious and cultural symbols, but it was also ideological. The still life was a taxonomy of wealth, gendered spaces, colonialism, the moral lesson against excess being advertised in them is constructed out of objects built on global systems of extraction, slavery, and violence. And the lesson itself also contains contradictions of its symbols. It pretends to condemn worldly goods, while in fact delighting in their meticulous representation. Harry Berger characterizes this as a double gesture, a performative bad faith display that was made in the Vanitas paintings to appease Protestant anxiety about material indulgence while simultaneously celebrating mercantile class pride in wealth by elaborately detailing and embellishing its every surface and texture. And maybe within that, there's something very human, a kind of struggle between our inner truths and the social truths we learn to perform. Still life as a genre is never innocent. These weren't neutral inventories of the domestic, they were moral performances coded with ideas, themes, and values of their time. And objects aren't neutral carriers of meaning. They are charged with hidden contexts and contradictions, performing in ways both forthcoming and concealed. And I don't mean to say this only as a negative function. One of my favorite still life paintings is Juan Sanchez Cotan's devotional still life, which, like all visual art, reflects the ideas of its time. The new mathematical and philosophical advancements that were reshaping how people understood the world during the Spanish Golden Age. The careful suspension of these spherical bodies intersecting diagonals and planes echo a fascination with perfect form and Archimedean geometry, with the orbits and hyperbolas charted by early astronomers. There is a kind of reverent wonder in considering that the universe might be ordered, measurable, and divine all at once. It shows how knowledge and representation are intertwined and how they can produce new ways of seeing the world that forever change how we look at even ordinary objects. Thinking again about objects performing meaning for us, the repetition of those performances are their own kind of ritual, encoding symbolic associations. In a way, objects are given these identities that are not innate, but constructed through repeated associations that sediment into an illusion of stability. Judith Butler describes gender this way. There are parallels there with how identity categories become solidified into truths that we accept as inherent, when they're actually unfixed in something that we construct culturally. Butler's framework is useful because repetition doesn't only stabilize identity, but it also introduces the possibility of deviation, where a new iteration can rupture instead of reaffirm what came before. These are the kind of things that I think about when I am composing and making work. My arrangements attempt to experiment with these ideas in how they rehearse cultural syntax and symbolic architectures that are set at subtle misalignment, opening it or exposing its mutability. In Multivalent, and in many of my projects, I treat instability as a generative condition rather than a problem to resolve. Meaning isn't innate inside the object. It arises between things, between people, with our own associations and memories and feelings, in proximity, in touch, and reflection. Each composition is an experiment in how far a symbol can be stretched before it fractures, and what new relations might appear in the spaces between. When I think about the word ritual, what ritual is to me is a container, a transformative container where intentional or repeated gestures create meaning. Also, there is for me an association with slowing down, a container for time and attention. There is a lot of ritual resonance in my creative practice. The acts of constructing and composing, shooting, developing, and especially with printmaking and alternative process, there are these slow, attentive, intentional, repeated motions. But a lot of the time, the kind of ritual that I mean when I'm talking about what my work itself is exploring, I mean the quiet, unnoticed rituals of viewing that people participate in every day. There's a kind of spell work that we are born into that instills these social rituals in us that get repeated daily. They produce stigma and stereotypes and sexism and homophobia, transphobia, racism, and how all of those are driven by rituals of association with danger and deviance or value. All of that becomes an active symbolism operating around us. These rituals strip away authentic personhood and real experiences. Quite often they have no foundation in personal lived experiences, and nevertheless they act upon our judgment of who is viewed as worthy or trustworthy or visible or valuable in conscious and unconscious ways. It enforces this idea that there are simplified categories to conform to or perform, that we have to fit into one or the other. There is a real anxiety for people around occupying more than one category or feeling more than one way about something, like that makes you unfinished. In a world where complexity is weaponized to exhaust people into compliance, where we're told that if something has multiple meanings, it must mean nothing at all, I am compelled to explore familiar architectures and setting these things as subtle misalignments, in hopes that they might produce openings to that constriction, to try to allow space for complexity. Part of how I try to do that is through work that invites slowing down. A lot of my work doesn't give you an easily registered narrative, which is something we're used to expecting from a photograph. I want to give people permission to pause, to feel something out, rather than being told what to see or given something that fits into a standard mold. This slowness stands in opposition to the speed of misinformation and rapid-fire distortions that we are navigating daily. A deliberate, patient act becomes its own form of resistance. Abstraction, I feel, can offer that pause. And for me, it isn't about hiding or trying to confuse people. It's about allowing uncategorizable, illegible, and mysterious elements to exist inside truth without collapsing it. I want abstraction to build trust in our capacity to navigate through uncertainty and complexity and mystery, to show that ambiguous and multiple truths can coexist without canceling each other out. John Sarkowski proposed that the photograph is either a mirror or a window. It either shows you the external world or the maker's internal world. I always feel moved to examine binaries. Can a photograph turn the inner mirror outward? Can the image ask you how you feel rather than tell you how I feel? Or can it draw feeling and meaning into something relational, something that becomes a conversation instead? In Multivalent, I'm less interested in using photography as either a mirror reflecting my own feelings or a window presenting the world as it is. Instead, I think of each image as a site for encounter, an open space where the viewer can negotiate their own feelings and associations or questions in relation to the objects. Sometimes I hope the work invites viewers to wonder not just what they feel, but how the objects themselves might feel, or what it means to encounter an image as an active participant rather than a passive observer. That relational encounter, the way meaning arises between an image and viewer, is central to me. This body of work was a way for me to explore making images that seek to return viewership and viewing into an encounter with one's own vision, with sight that is a creative act. Sarah Ahmed's writing has informed how I think about material and emotional relation in many ways. In her queer phenomenology, she considers how objects orient us, how they shape the ways we inhabit space, how we move towards desire or sustain relation. I think about how this sense of orientation connects to how we engage with proximity, direction, and attention, how the arrangement of things can create social and emotional worlds. In The Cultural Politics of Emotion, she describes how emotions are sticky. They have a stickiness and they stick to objects and histories and bodies. How feelings circulate and accumulate and give things a certain charge or direction. I love thinking about that and being reminded all the ways that even small things might carry traces of feeling or history, how matter itself can hold emotional residue. The materials that I use are old, found, or handmade. They feel like repositories of inherited and personal significance, while they're also objects that are shaped by cultural codes of gender, beauty, history. These are not passive carriers, but active participants in relation. They orient the viewer and the maker alike towards histories of attachment and loss and identity formation and connection. Ahmed's idea of queer use, that objects can be repurposed against their intended functions, is something I wanted to explore materially. What are objects for? And by extension, what are identities for? The objects I wanted to use are organic, elemental, able to hold charge and a breadth of time while maintaining a kind of porosity, an absorbent quality. I chose objects for their capacity to hold opposing truths. A rope binds or rescues. Armor signifies protection or harm. Lines that connect or bind or disrupt. I'm not imposing metaphors. The complexities are already alive in the materials and in their histories. My role was to arrange them so they became relational. They suggested that they could be in conversation with something out of the frame, and to try to make that connection. The sequence of images in Multivalent deliberately breaks from chronological order. Some images were made earlier or later in that linear order for simply technical reasons, where more complex arrangements took longer to construct. And then others emerged intuitively during moments of private and collective crisis or resistance or joy. Current events did bleed into the work in an atmospheric or formal sense, in the way of Cotan's quince, maybe. I wanted the images to resist linear time, so setting their sequence apart from the chronology was not to reset or erase acknowledgement of those resonances active in the time the work was made. It was a way to balance and bind the work together, to set the images on an arc that could be entered and moved through in a way that felt like returning the work to itself. I wanted to make open and affective spaces for giving agency back to objects and, by extension, back to ourselves as viewers, as bodies moving through the world that constantly tries to tell us what things mean to us, who deserves care, what's worth our attention. This project, Multivalent, is ultimately about resisting collapse as finality. Ambiguity, multiplicity, and ritual in my work aren't gestures towards oblivion or the unknowable, but toward slow encounters, engagement, participation. Ultimately, the work doesn't offer answers or narratives. It offers a way of being with complexity without needing to master it or be mastered by it. In a world designed to fragment our attention, I believe we can still recognize resonance. We can find, in the spaces between objects and within ourselves, presences and complexities that can be given permission to be seen and felt and known. These images are small rituals for that kind of seeing. They suggest that meaning is something we meet halfway. I'd like to read for y'all an excerpt of some of the accompanying text that goes with this body of work. In closing, objects carry their own layered histories, while viewers bring their own associations. Like an element with many valences, symbols combine with our own experiences. Meaning becomes contingent, shaped by context, memory, and proximity. The word valence comes from the Latin valentia, meaning power, potential, or capacity to combine or affect change. From its roots, we get the word valiant for courage and worth. When something carries more than one meaning, we are most familiar with using the word ambivalent, which collapses multiplicity into inertia. Multivalent suggests something else, a multiplying of capacity, potential for complexity that resists reductive erasures. This work evolved as a dialogue between forms, experience, and understandings to stage encounters rather than conclusions. In this polarized world so often dominated by binaries and ambivalence, I'm interested in how we place and see ourselves and each other in imagery that allows for lingering in complexity. What is recognized? What is overlooked? What is projected? How objects can become vessels for resonance, or can extend beyond their frames like an ellipsis. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
I
you,
love
Teela.
the silent clap.
Well, it's an absolutely remarkable and stunning body of work, I have to say.
Yeah.
I get the impression in watching the video that you live with these tableaus in some form, um, rather than them being something that you perhaps bring the elements together and set up and then photograph and then set aside or put in boxes. That these are things that you actually live with. Is that part of the process for you?
I wouldn't say that that is necessarily what is important to me about the objects, is that they are mine. A lot of them end up becoming a part of my environment and staying with me. And I, through the work as well, will end up developing a relationship with them as well. So there are a lot of things that are in this body of work that are still around.
And is it an ongoing series?
It is. Did I put that in here? This part of it is complete, but there is another segment or another body of work that I am expanding and attaching to this one that is kind of the opposite in a way. It's all color images, and they are very maximal. There are a couple of them in there. Let me see if I can find. Aha, here we are. This is not their final form. This is a work in progress, but I intend to eventually expand Multivalent into another project called Bind, Unbound, Bind that incorporates painting as well. It's be very experimental. We'll see how it goes. But I'm very excited about it.
Great.
I find this is Bill Wishner. I find your work stunning, and both your visuals and your narrative are provocative. From a narrative standpoint, I wish I could take apart a lot of your narrative and study it more, and talk about it more, because each part of it seems like it's not a lecture, but a discussion in itself. And I wish we had the time and could engage you in discussion as your narrative unfolds.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, it is one of the reasons why I did a video, is there are so many working parts in this body of work, and I know that if I allowed myself to just kind of dialogue with you all about it, that we would be here for hours until I felt like, I had actually gotten through the important parts. So thank you for letting me share that with you. I hope you
Teela,
enjoyed seeing the little. Oh yeah.
Teela, how did this work come to be? When was the first time you started on this journey of this complexity in still life? I know that still life was not it wasn't something you were drawn to originally, and then you found it as a way to complete what was in your heart and head. But when did you start this work?
This is a 2024-2023 project. So it was over a year and a half, almost two, of Multivalent specifically, if that's what you mean.
Yes, and the work prior to this, did it relate to this, or was this an idea that came to you and it was just this was the area, the lane you had to go down? How did it come about?
This was a new experiment, definitely. It was a lot of my work. I will try to explore a kind of architecture of a kind or a theme of images, or an aesthetic tradition, and so classical still life was this one. And then as I was exploring and researching and learning and reading new things, a lot of that ended up becoming incorporated into the work. Also visual artist inspirations as well. My interest in architecture does have a lot to do with artists like Diana Al-Hadid, looking at history and structure and the melding of those things. String models was a big theme for me as well, used in engineering and architecture. And there are a lot of artists that kind of explore concepts in that sort of way, like find a physical foundation for them to anchor to. So this kind of had that sort of spirit to it and just really took off and developed on its own from there.
Yeah, it's a wonderful project. Your black and white printing, I haven't seen a physical print, but what translates on the screen is lush and rich, and I mean, it's just
Deep.
it's deep. It's just incredibly magical. So well done.
Thank you so much. I am very interested, though I know I was narrating over the top of images, and I know that probably has an influence on being able to experience a neutral read of the images. But I would love to know what kind of themes come up for other people with this work, or what kind of narratives you feel arise for you while you're looking or moving through this body of work. If anyone wants to share, I would love to hear that. It's always really interesting.
Well, I personally was thinking of the work of Roger Ballon and Stephen Berkman when I saw your work. And if you don't know who Stephen Berkman is, you may not. He's kind of a hermit, but he's a photographic genius. And he photographs in black and white and is as pristine as your work is, getting all the tonal range in there. But he doesn't do still lifes, but he does imaginary uh, time periods, mostly with models dressed up in unusual clothing, shall we say. It goes way beyond that. I'm just scratching the surface. But you might be interested in looking at his work. It's Berkman.
Thank you.
And I love how you brought in the apples on the strings. You have a way of connectivity between objects, like you're dissolving borders between reality and fantasy, and there is that in between things that I see in your work that's really interesting to me. And I love what you say about, binary systems and how we tend to look that way. And there's so much richness outside those boundaries and behind those boundaries all around them. So I love what you're doing here. And it's really fun to make up my own stories about your work when I see it.
Oh, I love hearing that. And I love that those ideas resonated for you as well. It's especially, I don't know, affirming or warming to hear that visually the in-betweenness comes out of this work. It's such a revolving central theme for me in a lot of my bodies of work. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
May I share?
Of course.
Yeah, my name is Laura. This is the first time I've attended anything. I was struck by the fulfillment of some of the objects in that you, I remember a tulip and the object at like the floating rose petals, that it's not just the beginning of the object's usefulness, but it's the fullness of the object. And I remember I lived in Berlin for a year ago, and a friend gave me some tulips, and she said, "Wait till the very end." And they were the most beautiful in the last phase of their lives. And I was reminded of that evolution for me, and that beauty and meaning is not only in the beginning or the middle, but also during all the objects, phases of life, even the plate or the jar, etc. So thank you for that reminding of that experiment for me and how you've been able to capture. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a beautiful thought to share. It made me think of, while you were talking, one of the reasons why I love peonies. And if you ever had, there's so many varieties of them. And I had this one that's in Bind and Bound Bind, a big fluffy red one. And the most stunning thing it did was fall apart. The way that it fell apart was it just like slowly started showering little petals over the course of about 4 days. And it was actually magnificent to see it do that.
Teela, I'd like to read something that someone has written. My experience of Multivalent was one in which I felt invited. The work feels very much like an invitation to something I could not put my finger on, and your accompanying text seemed to confirm that the idea of an invitation to redefine any number of concepts. My question is, can you speak more about the role of language in this work? Am I simplifying the work when I say that I really enjoyed the invitation to see objects in a slower way and rework concepts to break out of the way I currently see?
That sounds like exactly what I was talking about. Let me see. Is that in the chat?
Yes, it is.
Let me try and find that.
And would the person who wrote it like to expand on that?
I mean, I think I got it down pretty well. I love the project, and that is very much how I felt about it. I could go on probably, but yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, especially to hear that you felt invited by the work. It is, I don't know, there is a kind of tricky feeling about trying to make something that isn't forcing a story, but trying to open one instead, or like open a space for a story. Uh, a kind of, I don't know, a different kind of carefulness about how they're being arranged. And so I really appreciate hearing that that resonated for you.
It's one more thing. I think one of the other speakers was talking about wanting to make a story when I look at these works, and my mind goes just, as someone who is not a photographer, firstly, I just have no idea how you made these, but then I wonder so many things in so many different directions when I look at them. And so, yeah, I just want to second what that other person had said. They're really just enjoyable to look at and to make something of, to feel something of. So yeah, thank you.
I appreciate that so much. Um, I'm really glad that you have that experience with them. It seems like it's a kind of project that seems to give people an experience in all sorts of experiences actually. Uh, but some people I've found are really not disturbed, but like don't know what to do with the abstraction in the work. Uh, we've had I've had interactions with some of the images in here. Is it one of these or one of the other ones that I ended up putting somewhere else? And uh, they were they were just having a really hard time understanding why I wanted the image to not be a straightforward portrait of a flower. And they kept like feeling frustrated about that of why did you ruin this perfectly good picture of a flower with the string in the way? And so yeah, I feel like uh, I want the abstraction to be an invitation into trying to like discern what's happening in this environment that does kind of break out of, I don't know, we live in a world with so many images that we're consuming all the time. It's all just scrolling. And so it feels like a way to kind of intervene on that by particularly using analog and using film, since we're so surrounded by digital photoshopped AI imagery now, to try and add that sort of mystery to how was this made.
I have to say that for the time that we've been looking at your work, I haven't really thought of the internet or Instagram or anything like that at all. It's like we've left that world and we've gone into another one,
Mm,
and I appreciate it.
Wonderful. That was one of the things that I was attempting with choosing what kind of materials went into the work. Things that could exist in a space that was outside of a very like specific time frame or space of time.
Teela, Nick in the audience has been really trying to ask you a question. So I'm going to introduce Nick. Nick, please ask Teela your question.
Hey, it's not a question so much as a statement. I just want to say that I found your connection between the pressure to collapse complexity into more understandable boxes and your connection between that and society's discomfort with transness and variations in gender identity. That's not a way that I had thought of it before, but I found that to be really salient and insightful. And so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Wow.
And I just want to read this one other comment in the chat. It says, the images are intimate, emotional, and tactile. The text conceptual and cerebral. A marvelous encounter and dialogue the artist has invited us into culture, history, experience, and our own.
Thank you for
You turned it
sharing
on?
that.
Sorry? Have you turned it on?
Hold on. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Teela, your whole presentation was truly unusual for us. Like I said, we normally have people speak, but I totally understand after watching the film why that was so necessary for your process. And you actually informed me as well of seeing outside my box. So I'm really grateful for what you shared with us today, and so proud that you're our third photographer awardee. I mean, it's truly an honor to be in this position, to have the means to help people get launched. And I have chills right now, just really grateful that you submitted and the juries, chose you. I had nothing to do with it. But it's been an absolute wonderful hour to get to know you and your work. Truly inspirational.
Thank you. It's been an honor and wonderful for me, especially. I am grateful beyond words for your support and you being excited about sharing this project and this work with me and with everyone who could make it today.
Yeah, it's great. And it will live on and on. So that's the wonderful part of Zoom and our new world. Does anybody else have any other questions for Teela? Okay. Well, Doug and I are really excited because we have an open show coming up in November.
We do.
And we're excited about people submitting. Please, Teela, back in Savannah, tell people to submit to the open call. We'd love to have more student work. We'd love to have more, work from all over the world. So thank you everybody for being here tonight.
Yeah, and thank you for your enthusiastic comments in the chat. Teela, do you want to close us out? Any final thoughts?
Oh gosh. No, I just appreciate everyone sharing this with me and allowing me to share it with you. Thank you for all your wonderful comments and the things that you all shared as well. Yeah, I'm just very grateful and glad to be spending this time with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Teela.
Thank you.
Perfect on the dot hour.
Thanks, y'all.
Oh,
Appreciate
and
it.
Thank you.
we'll be sharing, this will be posted on our YouTube channel in about a week or so. So it'll live on our website. It will be on YouTube, Pasadena Photography Arts, and we'll share it out on social media too. So you can rewatch it over and over and over again and learn more.
And tell all your friends.
Yes, right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you
Thanks
for being here tonight.